pounds. Got the same crew for days, ain't had time to change. Park up full of faces cause I beat up the block. Residue on my scale, line full of clientele. Got them lined up, pie strip out the pot. Still the same nigga who ain't never had none. Hoes used to talk down, bitch, look at me now. Started with a quarter ounce, graduated to a QP. Now nigga really trap out the pounds. Got the same crew for days, ain't had time to change. Park up full of faces cause I beat up the block. Residue on my scale, line full of clientele. Got them lined up, pie strip out the pot. Still the same nigga, but a dollar. I ain't never gonna change, I ain't never gonna change. Use a lame nigga, dick ride next man. Cause you see that it get a low change. I been doing thug thing, keeping it low key, nigga. I stay out the way. Every day hustling, tired of the struggling. 24/7, nigga, gotta get paid. Posted at the trap house first and last out. I ain't going home, I remember them days. All night flight, dog, selling out white hard. Money ain't right, I'ma knock out the G. Early in the morning in the mall for some G's. Get fresh for the day, Gotta go flip a pack, dog. Put up some racks, dog. Make that shit back. What I spend on them G's. Used to whoop up that white saw. Come bring that shit back, got 'em fuck up the years. It's so easy just to drop hard. I can scrape, rock the shit off, flip it 28 skirt. That's a double whoop, 28 to 56 knock.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you for tuning in. It's Saturday, and you know what we do on Saturday. We have our 2-minute relax session. Our 2-minute relax session will begin in about 10 seconds. So as this plays out, just relax. You don't have to think about anything. Just take your time and breathe, and then we'll get into the video. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the interactions of the tribal people on the coast. When we hear about the tribal people on the coast, it's fairly regulated to a few names or a few popular names of by Caucasian means, right? But what I want to do is get to the facts of the matter and go straight to it. When the Europeans pulled up and they had all these different classifications for people, what has to be understood is that the people also had classifications and names for themselves. In this, you will find groups that were actual political structures and groups that were made or seemed like they were one political structure or organization because their languages were classified as such. Now, in this, excuse me, I'm a little, what do you say, under the weather. But in this, what we began to find is these people were more in common. They had more in common than Europeans would have liked to had said. And also what tends to happen is, being that a lot of these people, their culture was either taken from them or made subordinate to others people's culture, they have to guard it. But in guarding it, they do a disjustice by not being honest in their work. So what I'm saying is this: though the Wale and Appalachia may seem to have been far apart from each other in yesteryears, there was major interaction between these different groups. Now, we don't just look at it linguistically, but we look at it culturally. We look at how culture from the coast began to move towards the interior. And as it moved towards the interior and dropped off their product, they also picked up the product and these the different things of other people's. So all of this became combined. This became a certain type of culture that can be seen in the ceramics. Now, to classify people simply by language is is what hurts a lot of people. Is definitely detrimental, but it hurts a lot of people. And it hurts them because what they don't understand is, if the Europeans pull up at one time and you're speaking this language, that language doesn't make you who you are. But the Europeans would classify you based on the language that you speak. So it's like today, if someone pulled up and said, well, he speaks English, so he must be an Englishman. This is the same thing that someone does when they say, well, my people spoke this, so they were this. Or my people were here, so they were this. Have you truly learned that culture from the practitioners of the culture? Or are you only getting an understanding from Europeans? Is there any familiar family teachings that apply to this and not just the individual? Now we look at how all of these different people's words get in each other's languages. And one would say, well, we only have a small amount, but the question becomes, how do you know exactly what you have if this has been going on for 4,000 years before European settlement? Same thing or similar thing when dealing with Wale and Ortista or Orista, excuse me. One would say, well, they spoke similar languages, but not understanding that the languages doesn't mean that they were the same people. They couldn't have been the same people if they were mixing, right? Because they weren't interbreeding. So when you have the pottery, when you have the homemaking, when you find that the languages began to either intertwine, they took loans from each other, and or even created trade jargon, this means that it was more social politically constructed than what Europeans would have likened it to be. The issue or an issue that goes on is is I want to format this the right way. An issue that some have is they limit their people's power based off European perception. They don't understand that if their people came in as a trading people, as someone that was doing business and decided to stay, then the language that they were speaking was already a Creole or a trade language. And then if they came to a land amongst a people where they didn't understand the language, then they would have to not just take loans from each other, but trade jargon, a trade language would be created for these people to understand each other. So though their base languages and root languages, birth languages are not mutually intelligible, They had languages which they created, which were mutually intelligible, and or they learned the other person's language so they can communicate with them in their style. This is a similar thing that happens with the building, right? Or with artifacts, or with dress wear, or with ceremony, agriculture. So what happens if at the time of European arrival, the Southeast was one big ass union of different tribal nations that had one language that connected them all because it consisted of everybody's language. And then they had their own language, which was their family and or town languages. But people don't think that our ancestors and even their ancestors were that intelligent to understand that, A, they spoke 4 or 5 different languages. Even if they weren't even mutually intelligible, they had to communicate with those people. But we limit that based off the understanding or the limitations of Europeans. Now, one would say, well, these people didn't speak our language, only some of them. So what? So what? Or well, these people didn't make pottery like us. It had so what? So stop trying to how I want to put this properly again. Make sure you understand what was actually going on in the Southeast. Make sure you understand that, hey, while the Wale and the Appalachian languages weren't mutually intelligible, the Appalachian called the Wale Wale. And in their language, it means the border or the edge. And these became the people, these are the people of the border or the edge. Now, not only did they call them Wale, but the Hichiti called the Appalachian they also called the Appalachian Wale because they were the people in the South or the people that was downstream. So this term you find also in Muskogee, and you also find it used and borrowed in another way, but we're not going to say it here because it's going to upset a few. But what we must do is look at the time we are in now and use that as a means or as the reason to unify with others properly. We can tell our stories. The issue is not gatekeepers, but those that are attempting to keep the gate or keep the door without their key and sword. You have to be honest in your work. If your ancestors' work has been minimized, it has been belittled, and all you're doing is saying, you know what, fuck it, I'ma argue, then you're not doing anything that can bring any glory to the family. But if you decide to unify with others while keeping your own, while knowing your own, this begins that union again. Now, one say, well, Wale and Makoma had wars, so I don't want to unify with them. Cool. There were some Makoma chiefs that did Wale dirty. There were some Makoma chiefs that wrote to the Spanish crown to make them the chief of Wale because we kept killing them and the Spanish. There were some Wale chiefs that were doing the Makoma wrong. Simply because they were Christian, the Wale were going to get them. Simply because they were Christian, the Wale were drowning them in. We didn't understand how the Europeans could do us wrong for not converting to Christism. And you converted to Christism. And then when you converted to Christism, you did nothing for your people. What you did was remove your own people out of your town. So now put that into perspective. Wale had to go liberate certain Makoma from their own chief that were kicking the non-Christians out of their towns. Wale had to get rid of their own chiefs because their own chiefs became Christian and started getting rid of Wale people out of their towns. So you take this and say, what was the middle? What started this shit? What was the reason for, whatever. You get back to the mission system. So yeah, bruh, what people listen, when you have people, there are two things people are gonna do. That's fuck and fight. People are going to make love and they're going to go to war. But to say, well, they did this to me, nobody did nothing to you. You weren't alive in the 1600s. You weren't alive in the 1500s. Well, you say, well, they did it to my ancestors. Your ancestors did it to others too. So what you gonna do is you gonna ride with fuck everybody because they did this to us, knowing that people that you consider you did the same. And the dagger is, unlike the Appalachian that had one language, unlike the Wale that had one language, the Timucua didn't have one language. What's classified as Timucua is 11, 13, 14, 20 plus languages. That's classified as one language because they found a majority of similarities between certain languages. But then they tell you that even these languages weren't mutually intelligible. So what's really going on? What are Europeans trying to find out that the indigenous people already know? Here's the answer. In this unification, people kept their own languages while speaking a language that was a language of or a point of unification. Europeans changed the classification or the name of that language to a whole other language, which concealed the history before that denotation, right? So, or that designation. So now you say, well, wait, if they're calling it Muskogean and the Muskogee people didn't get here until about 800 AD, but we've been here since 2000 BC, and they called the language that was already here Proto-Muskogean. What was the original name for the language Europeans classified as Proto-Muskogean? What was the word for that language? And if there was no single word, if there was no single branch, if there was no single language or dialect, what were the languages or branches of the classification Proto-Muskogean? This cracks the code. Only this cracks the code. Because now you say, well, damn, in the ancient world, this is who we were dealing with, while denying certain parts. You now have to say this is the fact of the matter. So now let's take names away. You have 20 and 40. So you have 60 different groups of people that have been interacting with each other for 4,000 years. You only think that they pick up a hand and foot amount of loan words? What is the possibility that they ended up mashing their language and everybody spoke one language, and then that one language ended up getting divided because there was a major war? Something that you can't find in books. How is people autonym found in everybody's language, but everybody else autonym is not really found in their language? And we're not simply talking about uh sound alike. We're not talking about sound alike. What do I mean? Was no way that the Spanish called these people Wale, or excuse me, the English called them Gullah, the Spanish called them Wale, the Appalachian called them Wali, the Hichiti called them Wala or Walahi or Wala, excuse me, Wahali. And the Temuco said Igual. And the Spanish also mistranscribed it as Igual. All of these are talking about the same area and same people. So, what is the possibility that this people interacted with all these other peoples, being that their name is found in their language? It doesn't make them people. But what's the possibility that they spoke these other languages, that they were multilingual, not just bilingual or trilingual? These people knew 4 and 5 different languages based off who they were dealing with, especially being they were tonal languages. So they didn't have to express themselves how we express ourselves today. They had short, quick to the point, or things were elongated, but it explained the complete concept or the idea. So we have to not only do the work, but one has to be honest in doing the work. No one is saying that the people considered Wale are the we not y'all daddies. We not y'all daddies. So since we not y'all daddies, let's get to the mothers. Why is it that the Gullah, or the people that are called Gullah, right, unfortunately, have 4 different haplogroups, which all originate with indigenous American women? These same haplogroups are found in each of the tribal people that I've mentioned. Now, Europeans will tell you that these people are different because they spoke different languages. But Europeans don't tell you that they've been mixing for 4 to 5,000 years before the bullshit. Excuse me, 3 to 4,000 years before contact. That's a lot of sex. We can't even conceive. The majority of people that stepped on the planet can't even conceive 100 years. And if we were to times that by 300, only we get the time span in which these people dealt with each other before contact. So we have 3,000 years or whatnot. And was it 30? Excuse me, Tim. Well, yeah, 130. So 100 times 30. So you have 3,000 years, and this shit is like, what are we doing with it? Like, what's really going on? Are you really going to sit here and say, nah, we didn't deal with them for this whole time? We had no interactions. No, ours was ours, and nobody knew ours. Nobody touched ours. That's not factual. I get it. Uh, I get it. Trust me, as someone who understands that our language is considered a dead language, I get it. But we're not going to limit our story. We're not going to limit our culture. Now, Europeans say, well, a canoe wasn't big enough to go see. They made little canoes. They couldn't seafare in these canoes. Well, how in the hell are canoes that were made in Georgia, Florida, Ohio, Kentucky? How are these canoes found in the Caribs? Why are scientists now coming out saying, hey, we think we were wrong about the peopling of the Americas? What do you mean y'all was wrong? Well, instead of saying that the people came up the Caribs and settled North America, we think it was the coastal people of North America that came down, and then people started to come down from the interior, and this is how the Caribs was populated. And it's something that was just released. They say, but we've been studying this or going after this for about 10 years, about a decade. So the information or the tribal information isn't limited to European understanding. If one does limit the tribal information to European understanding, all they're going to be doing is arguing European points. To have an elder to explain our creation story so beautifully, to have an elder that explain our origin story and then our migration story, to have an elder that then explains our disenfranchisement is beautiful. And that's something that I'm going to hold on to. It's also the reason that I cannot deny that people spoke each other's languages. Whether you say, well, we only have a couple loans, that doesn't mean that they didn't speak your language. Well, the Europeans didn't document. Well, damn, if the Europeans didn't document the name of the tribes, would you know what your tribal name is? So, again, that coastal interaction is something that definitely has to be studied. Don't study it looking at the people as if they didn't fuck with each other, because they definitely did. And those who think they didn't, they'll be foolish to think that they did not. That's it for me for right now. It's college football Saturday. Time to clean up. Do follow me on Instagram. And if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe here. Catch me on Facebook today, where I go over the bioarchaeology of Florida. I'm going to show some people some things, and I'm going to let the Caucasians speak to see how they feel about the subject.